World War II began on the 1st of September 1939, after Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France had promised to help Poland against any invader, and they demanded that Germany's troops should leave the country. Germany ignored this demand, and on 3rd of September 1939, Britain declared war. The Prime Minister at the time, Neville Chamberlain, made a radio broadcast explaining why war had been declared.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
The war affected men, women and children all over the country. The war started badly for Britain, and in May 1940, a new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, led the country. Nearly 1 million schoolchildren were evacuated from their homes and cities to escape German bombs. They didn't know where they were going. Many of them thought it was a great adventure, going somewhere that they had never been to before without their parents. Blackpool was one of these adventures, and had over 37,000 evacuees at the start of the war. However, a lot of children didn't like being away from home and wanted to go back. Many of them did, but as the war got worse, they were evacuated again. Homes taking in children were paid 12 shillings and sixpence a week. That's 52 pence in today's money. Over 38 million gas masks were given to men, women and children because the government was afraid that the Germans might use chemical weapons and poison the country. Gas mask drills were practiced at work and became a lesson in every school, like maths and English are today. These were very unpopular. The eyepieces for the masks steamed up as soon as they were put on, and many children hated the smell of the rubber. However, it was not long before the children realized that if they blew through their masks, they would make rude noises. There were all different types of masks, which everyone had to carry at all times by law. There were some for prams, babies, and even horses. The Blitz was a word used to describe the German bombings over most of Britain's cities. Between September 1940 and May 1941, the German Air Force, called the Luftwaffe, made 127 large-scale night raids. Of these, over 70 were targeted on London. Main targets outside the capital included Manchester and Liverpool. Blackpool and the Fylde didn't totally escape bombing, and one bomb dropped on Seed Street near the bus station, killing 8 people. During the Blitz, some 2 million houses were destroyed, and 60,000 civilians were killed, and 87,000 were seriously injured. Of those killed, the majority were in London. Until halfway through the Second World War, more women and children in Britain were killed than soldiers. All school children had to practice air raid drills in case their school was bombed. Children formed quietly into queues and were marched to schools' air raid shelters, like the picture from Waterloo School. The government also issued Anderson shelters to families to protect them from bombing, named after its inventor, Sir John Anderson. The shelter was very small, but could shelter a family in very cramped conditions. Eventually, 2.25 million were erected, and in British fashion made homely, with bunks inside and flowers and vegetables planted in the protected banks of earth. Father Christmas still came. There's the chimney. Where's the house? Where are all the kids? Here they come. Christmas was very different then. Children played with very simple toys compared to today's gadgets. Families were very lucky if they had a chicken for Christmas dinner, and trees were decorated in old stamps and savings bonds instead of toys and baubles. Families had to make the best of what they had. And here is Father Christmas visiting Blackpool Tower. Food rationing came into force in 1940. Each family had to register with a shop or store where food would be bought, and this is the only place where the family could shop. Each member of the family had his or her own ration books. Adults had a brown one, children had a blue book, and babies had a green one. Each person could have, each week, 8 pence worth of meat, 3 pints of milk, 8 ounces of sugar, 4 ounces of butter or fat, 4 ounces of bacon, just 2 ounces of tea, just 1 ounce of cheese, and 1 egg if they were lucky. Foods such as rice, jam, biscuits, tinned food and dried food were also rationed by points. However, it wasn't just food that was rationed. Clothing the family was a real nightmare. But in a lot of ways, rationing was good. It meant fair shares for everyone, and most people were fitter rather than fatter. Most girls were able to knit during the war, and many schools knitted blankets to give to hospitals. Each girl knitted a small square about 15 centimetres. And when 60 were made, they would be sewn together to make a blanket. Even some of the boys had a go. It was all part of the war effort where everyone helped. The Dig for Victory campaign was introduced following the winter of 1940. People were encouraged to grow vegetables to replace crops lost during the harsh winter. They were an important source of vitamins, as fruit was no longer available. Schools had rural studies teachers who taught the children how to grow vegetables. What was grown was often used in school lunches that the government had expanded, as most mothers were now at work all day and did not have the time to make packed lunches. Many areas of the country and school playing fields were turned into vegetable gardens to feed the nation. To work the fields, the British government created a land army, and by 1944, over 80,000 volunteers toiled the land. After nearly 6 years of war, Britain and her allies won the war in Europe, known today as VE Day. The Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, announced on the 8th of May 1945 that Germany had surrendered. There weren't many television sets in those days, and most people listened to the news on the radio or were told of the victory by other people. Newspapers carried the news across the world. A period of celebration began. Church bells rang, fires were lit, and street parties held all over the country. The celebrations were overshadowed though, because British forces were still fighting in the Far East against Japan, and it wasn't until August 1945 that World War II had truly ended. Soon after the war, British soldiers started to come home. However, they paid a very heavy price for victory. There were over 326,000 British soldiers, sailors and airmen killed over 6 years of fighting, and 62,000 civilians killed. It took several years after the war to put the country back together again. Over 57 countries were involved during World War II, with millions injured or made homeless. To remember sacrifices of war, Blackpool and most other towns, cities and villages built a war memorial, sometimes known as a cenotaph, so that we can remember those who gave their lives for our freedom. You will now see short clips of our armed forces as they are today.